السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الإعلام العالمي اليوم يسخر بالكثير من الكلمات والمصطلحات لتأطير الجماعات والأحداث في المنطقة العربية، لكن ما هي البدائل لتغيير تلك اللغة والسردية المشوهة؟ الحقائق في مقابل الخيال في المنطقة العربية، ولا سيما ما يتعلق بالنزاع في سوريا من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. وسائل الإعلام تضلل الرأي العام فيما يتعلق بسوريا، هكذا يقول ستيفن كينزر، وهو من كبار الباحثين في معهد واتسون للدراسات الدولية في جامعة براون، وكان من أبرز الكتاب الصحفيين في الواشنطن بوست. فتغطية الحرب السورية ستعلق في الأذهان بحسب كينزر، لأنها من الحلقات الأكثر خزيا في تاريخ الصحافة الأمريكية، وآخرها تلك التقارير المتعلقة بالأعمال الوحشية في حلب، حيث معظم الصحافة الأمريكية ينشر تقارير على عكس الوقائع الميدانية. تضليل وتشويه وتحريف لحقيقة الأحداث وبدايتها وتطورها وتصاعد وتيرتها، أمور أضاء عليها الكاهن اليسوعي الأب فرانس فاندرلاكت في يناير عام 2012، حيث قال واصفا أحداث درعا: لقد رأيتهم منذ البداية متظاهرين مسلحين في تلك التظاهرات، هم من بدأ بإطلاق النار على الشرطة. في كثير من الأحيان جاء عنف قوات الأمن رداً على العنف الوحشي للمتمردين المسلحين. كذلك عبر جيرمي سولت أستاذ العلوم السياسية في جامعة بلكند في أنقرة في أكتوبر من عام 2011، حيث أشار إلى أن الزعم بأن المعارضة المسلحة للحكومة قد بدأت منذ فترة وجيزة هو كذبة كبيرة. قتل الجنود وعناصر الشرطة والمدنيين وفي أبشع الظروف وحشية كان يحدث تقريبا منذ انطلاق الأحداث. شارمين نارواني الكاتبة المختصة بالشرق الأوسط تحدثنا من الداخل كيف بدأت تغطيتها لتطورات الوضع السوري، وما الذي أثار اهتمامها في مسرح الصراعات الخطرة هناك، وما أبرز ما اكتشفته وكشفت من فبركة وصناعة الصور وتشويه الحقائق والروايات المضللة والترويج لها، وماذا عن الحرب غير التقليدية وادواتها ومن يستخدمها باحتراف في المنطقة العربية. شارمين نارواني, commentator, writer and political analyst covering the Middle East. Welcome to من الداخل, or from the inside, ma'am.
Thank you for having me, Zainab.
You're most welcome. Well, during this month, March, we come, Shármín, to commemorate 5 years into the Syrian conflict, and maybe still to come more. Now, as a Western journalist who have covered extensively this region in particular, what can you tell us about the factors that drove you into covering extensively the stories of Syria, and what drew you to this, and what have you learned so far?
You know, I can quite honestly say that Syria was the story that changed my life. It changed my views on a lot of things. It deepened my understanding of the regional geopolitics, global power struggles in a way that I thought I knew before. I think Syria has been transformative for a lot of people, and it's going to continue to be transformative for the region. In terms of what drew me to it, I was writing about regional politics for a number of years prior to this. I didn't know Syria very well. I relied on what we call Syria experts, most of whom I think have not predicted a single thing right during the course of this conflict. And I kind of fell into it. I was based at the time here in Beirut, and Syria is right across the border. It was filling our headlines, but I was a little bit concerned because at the time that I first came to Syria, we were about 9 months into the conflict. And
so late 2011.
Yes, late 2011 was when I did my first Syria story. I think it was a confusing story.
In what sense?
It seemed to proceed with the narratives of the Arab Spring. dictator killing his own people. This line we heard over and over again. It's too late. The dictator must go. These are revolutions. These were peaceful uprisings. Some of the earlier ones in Tunisia and Egypt, for instance, had happened so quickly that we hadn't had time to take stock and really examine what was going on around us. But with Syria, it took a lot longer, and the news was contradictory from Syria.
Only concerning Syria or the other Arab countries, as a Western journalist?
Well, I think, Bahrain also raised some questions in early 2011. Jordan and Oman were two other countries where there were stirrings on the street. So, we were all trying to take stock of these different events taking place in different parts of the region, from North Africa to the Levant and to the Persian Gulf. And they weren't all one story, but the Western media loves to bring sound bites to the Middle East, whatever story they're telling. So it became the story of the Arab Spring. What was happening in Syria, what was happening in Libya, what was happening in Egypt were one flavor. And of course that's not true in any of these countries.
What did you learn from covering Syria, Shármeen?
So I would say that my first story was one that I covered from outside. It was about the Arab League and the changes that had happened there. Qatar and Saudi Arabia taking the helm, stealing the helm if you'd like, very aggressively. I had some information leaked to me about some of the negotiations going on with the Syrian state, and I piled in. I wrote that story, and from then on it was question after question. So we were hearing these narratives, but in fact, if you were in the business of digging up information, as a journalist should do, if you were in the business of questioning the establishment, governments, authority, and sound bites, you had to ask some obvious questions. Why was Syria taking so long if it was the same story? Why were you seeing hundreds of thousands of people on the streets marching in favor of the government?
Yes, in talking about the four main narratives that were in the Western media, that the dictator is killing his own people, and that the protests are peaceful, the opposition is unarmed, and that it's a popular revolution. You thought that this was not true when you came to cover Syria. But why was nobody allowed to question these assumptions?
Well, this is the thing about narratives, and as it's used by governments in public diplomacy. What Western governments often do is they start off any objective of theirs, any operation of theirs, by laying the ground, by scene setting, preparing populations, swaying perceptions en masse, to ensure that what they have planned will go smoothly, right? So,
can you give us some examples, Shármeen, from your articles that you have written, just to give the viewers a sense of what you have been writing about, what things that you have disclosed, and which unfortunately didn't find sound and echo in the Western mainstream media or corporate media?
Well, some of them are larger themes, and others were little things that happened. For instance, a journalist friend of mine had come out of Syria and said there was no shelling from naval ships of Latakia, right? And but we were being told this was happening. I learned later in this conflict that you can simulate the after effects of shelling by burning tires on rooftops. Okay. We saw footage here and there of people, activists, Syrian opposition activists, screaming into microphones of Western media, in front of Western media cameras, with shelling and the sounds of shelling and gunfire going on in the background. But in fact, during the takes, in between, we were seeing that they were just standing around chit-chatting, and there were no sounds of gunfire. So things like this. But one of my early stories that opened my eyes was, this is during the Baba Amro, the conflict in Baba Amro in February of 2012. Well, we were being told that the government is carpet bombing Baba Amro, and that the bombing is indiscriminate. And they were targeting civilians. We saw some satellite pictures that popped up on CNN, and CNN claimed, to great display, that these are pictures showing Baba Amro and showing, you can see the destruction of roads here, you can see fires there, you can see mortar shelling the remnants of these things. And doing a satellite search, we discovered that those photos were in Al-Zahra, which is a Homs neighborhood, very, very separate from Baba Amro, and it is a pro-government neighborhood, a primarily Alawite neighborhood. At that point in time, from the State Department through the Western media ranks, we were being told that the opposition does not have heavy weapons. Okay, so here was something that visually, factually contradicted the narrative. There were other things like this.
So it's facts versus fiction.
Facts
always.
versus fiction. And I think many of us learned through the Syrian conflict that an image is no longer worth 1,000 words. Images can be manufactured. Images are being fabricated.
Yes. Now, on the use of language to cover the region, Shármín, there are, as I said in my introduction, there are many dangerous words and phrases used to frame by the Western media, used to frame the people of the region and the events of the region. Like, for example, to refer to the bombings that took place in Lebanon by the Hezbollah stronghold, Assad's stronghold for car bombs in Damascus, Assad's heartland for massacres in Latakia. Why is it important for us to retake the language, to have control over our stories?
Well, if we're going by the Syrian experience, the four narratives that I picked out, which is the dictator is killing his own people, if that image takes hold, if that narrative takes hold, you then lose the right to question it. Anyone who tried to question it was considered pro-regime, was considered pro-Assad. Not that these are necessarily bad things. They're just, it's marginalization language. Its intent is to ensure that people shy away from questioning the narrative. You know, we have
to dehumanize whoever is against such a narrative.
Yes, yes, but mainly to marginalize them, and we have this in the Palestine-Israel conflict. Israel has the right to exist. This is a narrative. Okay, if you question that, suddenly you become a Holocaust denier, you become an anti-Semite, etc. So these narratives are created to ensure that the story becomes unquestioned, and that anyone who does try to question it is marginalized and viewed as subversive, if anything.
Right, Shármín, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to come back to your example and to discuss what is termed by the unconventional warfare. But after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. لماذا تعد الروايات مهمة جدا وخطيرة، والغرب يستخدم الروايات لتجهيز المشهد لمصلحة أهدافه الخاصة، وهذه تخدم هدف استمالة الجماهير لدعم الأهداف الغربية؟ شارمين نارواني المعلقة والكاتبة السياسية المختصة بالشرق الأوسط توضح لنا خفايا هذه المقاربة وماذا تقول عن الحرب غير التقليدية وأدواتها.
Well, yes, if the goal in Syria was, in fact, as we've come to believe, to weaken a key Arab member of the resistance axis, you had to set the scene. You have to create the foundations for military intervention to ensure that populations who are tired from U.S. interventions post-Afghanistan and post-Iraq would be prepared to go it one more time. Same with Libya. You know, so in Libya we saw the Americans come in from behind, you know, as part of NATO, with Arabs taking the lead. In fact, it's not the case. It's just repackaging, remarketing the same kind of interventionism. So in order to enter the Syrian theater, the West and their regional allies had to create a perception within the population that this was not only permissible, but it was desired. And so we had, you know, enormous amounts of information pouring out of Syria, not just cell phone video footage, but casualty rates that were coming out every day on how many people were getting killed. But you know,
and you have discussed this in your article, The Casualty
Yes.
List, that asks questions.
It was
about
the
this.
first true investigative piece I did on the Syrian crisis, and I went into Syria in January 2012 to interview domestic opposition people and to learn more about these casualty counts and meet with some of the groups who were putting out numbers every day. And one of the first things, I mean, I think as a journalist, as somebody who is supposed to ask questions, okay, we're getting these numbers every day, but who is killing and who is dying? And the information we're getting out, who does it benefit? Who's putting out the information? Who's counting these casualties? In the middle of...
And how accurate is the counting?
And how accurate is the counting? I discovered, and this is not just by interviewing people who did the casualty counts and activists, but UN agencies, other NGOs, the ICRC, the Red Cross, the Syrian Red Crescent and others, that in fact there was quite a mix of people who were dying. So you had at that time, the opposition forces were not in uniforms, they were in civilian clothing. So anyone who was dead was just counted as a casualty figure, and the narrative helped us understand and interpret those casualty figures coming out every day, and the narrative made us understand that these were civilians who were in opposition to the government, which was not at all true. One of the things I discovered to my shock in early 2012.
Maybe this was part of how they have sold the conflict.
Yes, because more and more
trying
numbers
to have
of
a
people.
humanitarian civilian aspect
Yes,
into
well,
it.
you create a humanitarian intervention, which is what they did with Libya, even though all of this is entirely illegal. So they spun the numbers, they spun the dead, and in fact many of the people dying, and this is something I learned in January 2012 when I was there, and this is in the UN report on the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, that there were about 2,500 dead Syrian forces. This is 10 months into the crisis. Okay, what does that mean? At that time, there were only 5,000 registered dead. If half of them were Syrian forces, we learned something. We learned that, in fact, the opposition was armed.
It wasn't
right?
peaceful after all.
We learned that not all the people dying were civilians. Okay, we learned that it was a different kind of conflict that we were being told. Right? Nobody wanted to hear the story. But I discovered that in the first month in Syria, we're talking between March 23rd and April 25th of 2011, 88 Syrian soldiers were killed across the country, not just in Deraa. They were in Latakia and Tartus, in Homs, they were in Harasta, they were in Talkalach, they were Homs and Hama, you know. This was astounding information, and this information wasn't really refuted because you could actually see every day the Syrian media would publish the names of dead soldiers and security forces. So if you went to collate this information, you could actually see that pattern. Of course, we were told at that time that the protests are peaceful. Now, people, when I was doing this story, I interviewed people from Deraa who had since left Syria, and one in particular was in the Gulf. And he said to me that many of us, this was a largely pro-government area that before the uprisings, and by the first few months, 99.9% of us believed that the government was shooting at people. He said that changed very quickly. We felt that there was something else going on. There were a lot of strangers coming in from other parts of Syria and outside. And he said that the reason people were being shot, in his mind, was people had to die for funerals to take place to justify public gatherings. Okay?
This is part of what was talked about in the defense ministry, and then what you referred to as the unconventional warfare, and that the US employs effortlessly in our region. You have a special definition for that. You have referred to it in one of your articles. How does it work, and what does it attain to accomplish?
If I may, for a second, Zeynab, just read a quote from the U.S. military Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Manual. It says, "The intent of U.S. unconventional warfare is to exploit a hostile power's political, military, economic, and psychological vulnerabilities by developing and sustaining resistance forces to accomplish U.S. strategic objectives. For the foreseeable future, U.S. forces will predominantly engage in irregular warfare operations. Syria is a classic U.S. unconventional warfare operation. It begins by, and now there's a fantastic few graphics in the actual manual, which I've sent to you and I think you've looked at. And there's one that just lists what the U.S. government does and is prepared to do to create regime change. It starts from creating dissatisfaction, all right, rumors, all right. And we know from WikiLeaks that there were rumors that the U.S. intensified activities to create Sunni Shia kind of rhetoric in Syria.
Yes, allow me to wrap up this interview, Shármين. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but let me read something from whatever you've written. You said, quote, "What we need to do is create our own game, a rich vocabulary of homegrown narratives, one that defines ourselves, our history and aspirations based on our own political, economic and social realities. Let them reject our version, let them become the rejectionists in our game and give it life. Syria changed the world. It brought the Russians and the Chinese into the fray and changed the global order from a unilateral one to a multilateral one overnight. We now have immense opportunities to recraft the world and the Middle East in our own vision. New borders, we will draw them from inside the region. Terrorists, we will defeat them ourselves. NGOs, we will create our own with our own nationals and our own agendas. Pipelines, we will decide where they are laid. So let's start building those new narratives before foreigners came or come in to fill the void." Shármين Naroani, commentary writer and political analyst covering the Middle East. Many thanks indeed for this interview.
Thank you, Zainab, for having me and giving some airtime to the narratives issue.
Yes, you're most welcome. It's very important, you know, it's very eye-opening to understand what is really being cooked when it comes to Syria, to Libya, to Iraq and elsewhere. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.